The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, known for its iconic locomotives, luxury passenger trains, and a schedule so precise that people once used the arrival of trains to tell the time of day. But trains weren't the only thing the Santa Fe used to transport its cargo. While rail traffic was certainly the backbone of the Santa Fe, the company also used large fleets of trucks, trailers, shipping containers, and even boats to transport cargo during the last miles of its journey. But why would a railroad want to take to the seas? What was the reason for these out-of-place cargo carriers? What types of freight did they haul? And whatever happened to them? From the early 1900s to 1984, the Santa Fe used a fleet of tugboats to shuttle barges around the San Francisco Bay. There were 8 ships in total, with 5 of them being used before World War II. Unfortunately, it was very difficult to find any pictures of these pre-war boats, but I do have their names. They were called Richmond, A.H. Payson, E.P. Ripley, W.B. Story, and A.J. Wells. After World War II, the Santa Fe cut its fleet down to just 3 boats, since the introduction of piggyback service reduced the demand for tugs. The 3 new boats were named Edward J. Engel, Paul P. Hastings, and John R. Hayden. All 3 of these ships were named after Santa Fe executives at the time. What amazes me is that the boats were painted very similarly to Santa Fe's locomotives. While individual boats sometimes changed paint schemes, these are the 4 designs that were used throughout the years. The Paul P. Hastings wore a paint job that I can only describe as the boat version of the Whisker Cat scheme. The John R. Hayden wore a paint job similar to that of a rotary snowplow, but with red as the dominant color instead of blue. And the Edward J. Engel started out wearing a classic bonnet, but was later repainted into this design. Also, all the boats had a Santa Fe cigar band across the front, just as the locomotives did. What was the reason for these tugboats? Why would a land-based railroad need a whole fleet of maritime vessels? Well, it's because Santa Fe's tracks were more or less fragmented in the Bay Area. You see, Santa Fe's tracks only went as far west as Oakland. While they did have some tracks across the bay in San Francisco, they were completely isolated from the rest of Santa Fe's route. Even though Southern Pacific had a line that could provide access to the isolated tracks, the company decided to deny Santa Fe use of it, essentially barring the railroad from using its own property. So now, Santa Fe was forced to get creative, which prompted the company to buy 5 newly made tugboats at the beginning of the 20th century, sparking the start of Tugboat Service. Santa Fe used its 5 new boats to haul barges loaded with rail cars all over the San Francisco Bay. The rail cars were usually loaded with things such as whiskey, newsprint, chlorine, and other miscellaneous cargo. The tugboats were able to keep Santa Fe's tracks in San Francisco useful by supplying them with a steady stream of rolling stock. However, the tugs and barges didn't just serve the Santa Fe. During their heyday, the barges would stop off at slips that serviced the State Belt Railroad, later known as the San Francisco Belt Railroad, the Northwestern Pacific Railroad, and the Alameda Belt Line. Now, not only was Santa Fe helping itself by keeping its isolated tracks useful, but it was also helping to keep other smaller railroads in business by interchanging cars with them. Over the years, the boat routes changed quite a bit, but thankfully, there's at least one map on the internet that shows where these boats and barges would go. As you can see, they stayed well within the San Francisco Bay, and their routes were relatively short. Here's a route that was the whole reason for the tugboat's existence. Cars would be ferried from Point Richmond to Channel Street in San Francisco, where Santa Fe's isolated industrial tracks were. And there's that Southern Pacific line that could have let Santa Fe have access to the tracks. But I'm sure Southern Pacific had a good reason as to why they denied service to the Santa Fe. All the other routes on here are for servicing other railroads. You got the Alameda Belt Line here in Alameda, the State Belt Railroad right next to the water in San Francisco, and the Northwestern Pacific Railroad way over here in Tiburon. As for the 5 original boats that were retired during World War II, 3 of them were scrapped in the 50s and 60s. One was sold to Crowley Tugboat Company, and the other one was commandeered by the government. The final 3 boats slowly went away one by one during the latter half of Santa Fe's tugboat service. With piggyback trailers proven to be highly efficient, it meant cargo that would usually only be transportable by rail could now be driven to its destination by truck, which caused the demand for Santa Fe's tugs to plummet. The Edward J. Engel was the first to go in 1969, and it actually has quite an interesting story. She served under various companies until 2007, when she sank after vandals removed a brass seacock valve. She would stay at the bottom of the sea until 2013, when she was raised up and subsequently scrapped the next year. The John R. Hayden was sold in 1976, and just like the Edward J. Engel, it also changed companies and names over the years. It was even repowered with a new diesel engine at one point. The whereabouts of this ship are pretty much unknown. It was put up for sale in 2016, but after that, the trail goes cold. Paul P. Hastings was the last tugboat used by the Santa Fe. Tugboat Service ended with her when she was sold to American Navigator in 1984, and subsequently renamed to Terminator. And in 1992, she sank at Point Arena in California. Ultimately, it was a fire at the Richmond Slip that ended tugboat service for good, since it would have been very expensive to clean up and rebuild after the fire, and at this point, the lone tugboat was barely profitable. It's always cool to see creative solutions to tricky problems, and the story of the Santa Fe and its tugboats is no exception. Who would have ever thought that a railway would need to purchase and operate its own boats? What's even more wild is that this ain't the only story like it in railroading history. Companies such as New York Central, Erie, Canadian National, and more have all used tugboats at one point or another. But those are stories for another day. Thanks for watching. If y'all enjoyed this video, consider checking out some other ones of mine. Also, maybe pass yourself by the merch shop. The link's in the description. Anyways, till next time.